Hello, and welcome to my presentation, Percona Database Distributions and Overview. My name is Lenz. I'm based in Hamburg, Germany, and I'm a member of the database engineering team here at Percona. I joined the company in January 2021, and in my role as the Director of Server Engineering, I lead and support the teams that work on our Percona database distributions, which are the topic of this talk. In this presentation, I would like to give you an overview about what our database distributions are about, why we're doing it, and why you might want to consider using them for your projects. I'll conclude this presentation by giving an update on a few recent changes and highlights of each individual distribution. Before I'll talk about our distributions in particular, I'd like to start by providing some context, giving you an overview about the roles that we play in the various open source database ecosystems, and by explaining a few terms that I'll be using in this presentation. As you can hopefully see from this picture, Percona as a company plays multiple different roles when it comes to how we work on and with open source software, and the corresponding ecosystems and communities. All of our software we create and maintain is released under open source licenses. Most of these components are included in our database distributions, but they are standalone projects and tools as well. Together, they form what we refer to as the Percona solution stack, about which I'll talk a bit more on a later slide. While this visualization focuses on our core database components, MongoDB, MySQL, and PostgreSQL, the same principles apply to any of the components that we include in our distributions. Firstly, Percona is a distributor. In a nutshell, we take existing upstream open source projects and we redistribute them as components of our solution stack, namely our database distributions. When it comes to the core database components like MongoDB or MySQL, we enhance them by applying additional modifications and improvements, adding new features, improving performance, or fixing bugs. In this model, the majority of the development work is done by the respective upstream communities, and Percona is participating in these, for example, by submitting bug reports and patches. The level of engagement varies by project. Some examples in this category include Percona Server for MySQL or Percona XtraDB Cluster, which are based on the upstream Oracle MySQL and Galera cluster projects. We try to follow an upstream-first approach here, in which any bug fixes and improvements that we create are submitted back to the upstream projects for consideration and inclusion, in the hope that they will be accepted. Secondly, we are a creator and producer of open source software by ourselves. We make the source code of these available on GitHub. The majority of the code is written by engineers employed by Percona, but we also engage with our community of contributors to encourage participation in the form of submitting feedback like bug reports or enhancement reports, or working on actual code contributions in the form of GitHub pull requests. Some examples of such projects include Percona Extra Backup, Percona Backup for MongoDB, or Percona Monitoring and Management, also known as PMM. One thing that I would like to emphasize here is that we are not in the business of selling software licenses. We are a strong believer and supporter of the open source software development model, and all of our software is licensed under open source licenses and is available free of charge. You can download and install our database software without any restrictions or limitations. Our software is the primary vehicle for attracting users and making them aware of us as a company and our service offerings. Many of the improvements and enhancements that we include in our distributions are open source implementations of features that are useful in enterprise environments, but are only available in the form of proprietary, paid-for extensions by the upstream projects. These include features like more advanced backup solutions, security enhancements, or tighter integration with existing IT infrastructure. Making all of our database software freely available also ensures that you remain in control of your data and you don't end up in a vendor lock-in situation. Our business model is bundling the software with additional services, which are available in the form of subscriptions. The services we provide include various solutions to help our customers being productive using open source database technologies. One of them is the support offering, which gives you a way to contact our experts via phone, chat, or email in case of trouble or when you have questions about how to set up your production environments. Our managed services offering provides you with remote DBA resources in case that you want to deploy and operate your databases on your own infrastructure or in the cloud, but you cannot or do not want to employ a full staff to manage these. Our experts can assume responsibility for the setup, monitoring, administration, and emergency response of your databases. Thirdly, our consultants can be booked to support you in setting up more complex projects from scratch or when you're facing performance or scalability issues. Okay, let's talk about our distributions. You may already be familiar with the concept of a Linux distribution like Red Hat or Ubuntu Linux, which performs the service of selecting, integrating, and testing all of the distribution's individual software components to ensure they interoperate and work well together. The software is then bundled with additional service and support offerings like providing updates and maintenance. Similar to Linux distributions, the Percona database distributions aim at being enterprise database distributions with a deterministic and conservative release cycle. They are a well-groomed collection of our recommended best practice open source tools and utilities for each of what we call the core database component, which is either MongoDB, MySQL, or PostgreSQL. The content of each distribution varies, but for each distribution we have identified the most commonly used tools that help to implement key enterprise functionality, including high availability, load balancing, backup and restore, disaster recovery, monitoring, and observability. We maintain this collection of software tools that are commonly used together with these database components with the intention to make using the database easier and more productive. These components have been selected in collaboration with our users and experts based on their experience working on production environments of our customers. We also try to be fully compatible with the upstream database versions. Any modifications that we do are changes and additions on top. We don't really want to modify or remove any underlying functionality. Moving from the original upstream database component to the Percona equivalent should always be possible and straightforward. We test and validate the interoperability of all the components of our distribution. When upgrades are made, we retest all components and other products that may be impacted so that we avoid any regressions for our end users. By using our distribution, you are ensured that the components interact with each other properly. For our users, it must be sufficient for them to add our distribution package repository to their Linux operating system of choice, and then use the Linux distribution's built-in tools like apt or yum to install and update our database distribution packages. No other third-party software should be needed. Our database distributions are available for the most common Linux distributions that are used in production environments, like Red Hat Linux and compatible derivatives, Debian or Ubuntu Linux. Together, our database products and the distributions form what we call the pillars of our solution stack. They are the foundation for the software layers we put on top of the solution stack, which we call the consumers. In this architecture, our Kubernetes operators provide the management glue layer between PMM and Percona platform as the end-user facing management and monitoring application and the database technology underneath. Of course, any component of the stack can be used independently. But our aim is providing a well-tested and integrated solution stack where using multiple components significantly increases the value and usefulness. In closing, I would like to introduce each of our database distributions in a little bit more detail. I'd like to start with our distribution for MySQL, which is based around our oldest database products, Percona Server for MySQL and Percona ExtraDB Cluster, which includes the Galera replication framework for enabling synchronous multi-master database replication. Depending on the database component, the distribution includes some additional components to facilitate setting up high availability configurations and methods to distribute and manage workloads. The distribution also contains Percona Extra Backup, which is our open source implementation of a hot backup solution for MySQL, which supports creating backups without blocking ongoing database operations. I'd like to briefly highlight some recent notable improvements that we've added to Percona Server for MySQL as included in our distribution. As mentioned earlier, our focus is on providing open source alternatives to often sought enterprise features that our users find useful. Some recent additions include enhanced encryption functionality, for example, a way to simplify the management of encryption keys in the database using the Key Management Interoperability Protocol, also known as KMIP, or using Amazon's Key Management Service KMS. We also added additional functionality to encrypt and decrypt data in the application using the OpenSSL library, helping developers to use standardized best practices for performing this task. The slow query log improvements added microsecond time resolution and additional statistics to the slow query log output. It's possible to enable or disable the slow query log at runtime. Moreover, we added logging for the replica SQL thread and added fine-grained control over what and how much the database should log into the slow query log. Percona Extra Backup recently gained functionality to store backups in Microsoft's Azure Blob Storage as an alternative to the already existing Amazon S3 support. Our distribution for MongoDB is arguably the smallest one if you look at the number of components we include. But this is due to the fact that MongoDB provides a lot of the desired functionality out of the box already and does not require any additional software to implement many of the usual scenarios. We've added a number of enterprise features to MongoDB in the recent years. The most recent one is the possibility to retrieve and manage encryption keys using the Key Management Interoperability Protocol KMIP, similar to how we enabled this functionality in Percona Server for MySQL. With version 1.7 of Percona Backup for MongoDB, we were finally able to overcome a key limitation of previous versions. Instead of performing logical backups, which can become quite time-intensive on large data sets, PBM now also supports creating physical backups. This significantly expands the range of application of this tool and is a key performance improvement by notably reducing the time to create database backups. The latest addition to our Percona database distributions family is PostgreSQL, which we added to our portfolio in May 2019. Percona distribution for PostgreSQL is a collection of tools to assist you in running PostgreSQL in production environments. It includes the upstream PostgreSQL database engine and complements it by a selection of tools and extensions that enable solving essential practical tasks efficiently. One of the notable components developed and maintained by Percona is pgstat-monitor, a PostgreSQL extension that collects extensive query statistics to help monitoring the performance of your database. pgstat-monitor just recently reached GA status, and we're actively working on further enhancing and improving this component to make it the most popular and useful monitoring extension available for PostgreSQL. There's much more I could talk about for each of our distributions, but I wanted to keep this presentation on a high level to give you a first overview. I hope you found this information useful. Please let us know if there's anything you would like to know more about. We're happy to answer any questions you might have. Our forums at forums.percona.com are also a very useful resource to post questions or get involved in ongoing discussions. Thanks for watching.